Well, welcome to this episode of Church Finance Insights, and a very special welcome today to our guest, Benjamin Bond. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Ed. It is a pleasure to chat to you and those listening.
Yes, and Ben, the name of your business, I'm just going to share a
Mm.
quick slide here, is Kingdom Mortgage Broking.
Yep, right.
And the topic today is pastors and home loans. And that could apply to other ministry workers and so forth. I just wanted to pop this up on the screen if people want to get in touch with you later. Your website is Kingdom Mortgage Broking, not broker, broking.com.au, and then info at for the email address. So anyone watching, please feel really welcome to reach out to Ben. So let's kick it off, Ben.
Mm.
First question, is it harder for a pastor to get a home loan than a regular person or someone on a regular kind of employment arrangement?
Yeah, I'd say yes and no. As you can imagine, banks and lenders have a typical client that they're sort of all structured around. Their policies are based on their processes, their training of their staff. And so if someone comes along with a little bit of a different income type, it can throw a few lenders or banks off a little bit. Um, but with the right people, right company, we can get anything through. It's just sort of you need to be more savvy in how we present how a pastor or minister's income will look to the lenders.
Mm.
Income looks a little bit different.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess depending on the way the payroll is structured and the pay slip structured, their what comes through on a pastor's MyGov or into their tax return
Mhm.
might be significantly less or lower than what their actual package is. Does that automatically mean they can't borrow much?
No. So it doesn't. So you're absolutely right. If we treated a pastor or minister and their income through their tax return like a general PAYG employee, then it would look like they have a very small income because all of the tax exempt fringe benefits, some of the salary packaging and the allowances just don't show up. And so um, we can still present that to a lender in a way that does show those other elements of income. But yeah, typically when you do need a bit more of care when putting that application together.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose some of the typical types of salary packaging or allowances that pastors might have would be, I guess the big one would be housing allowance,
Absolutely. Yep.
and
Housing.
maybe car or travel. And then
Yep.
maybe some minor ones like utilities or phone.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about how a bank would view those different types of
Mm.
living arrangements. Mm.
Yeah. So normally we would have, um, we kind of change our language sometimes when working with the bank. So it might be a stipend that you're used to communicating income around, but we might say salary. So a portion will be attributed to a tax exempt portion and some will be taxable. Now, you'll have of that tax exempt income, you'll then have some additional allowances. And that's the key terminology that banks are looking at is what is an allowance and then how do we treat that as a lender? So some of the banks will take 100% of that allowance. So if you have an allowance towards your housing, they'll attribute that back as income and reduce it as an expense. Other banks they'll shade it, and so they'll take only 90% of that allowance or 85%. And so your housing and your vehicles, they represent some real economic value for individuals. So that definitely gets added back in. But the trick is to have really clear documentation around how much of the allowances is attributed to each type. And so we really like to see that to be clearly documented. And different denominations and churches can articulate that a little bit differently. So the clearer things are, the easier it is for us to be able to attribute that back as income.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And like speaking of denominations, does it matter what denomination a pastor belongs to, or is it more a case of translating how that
Mm.
denomination typically puts it into a language the bank will
Yeah.
accept or understand.
Like what you said, it doesn't matter what denomination by any means, but we do see some denominations have different levels of, I guess, recording of information. Some are a bit more loose and some are very particular around the documentation.
Mm,
So it doesn't matter what denomination it is, it's as long as we can paint the picture of
mm.
where all those allowances and income that is non-taxable is going. That's the key.
Yeah, yeah, perfect. Um, Now, some pastors might have approached a bank themselves and may have been told something, maybe even told they're self-employed or
Hmm.
that type of thing. Is that true that banks would see
Mm.
people that way?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a client um, and not a church pastor, but still designated as a religious practitioner for tax purposes. And and absolutely, we went to a variety of lenders, and they look at their policy, and they see, oh, you own a majority share in a charity or whatever it is. You have religious practitioner status, but we're not viewing you as a PAYG. We're viewing you as self-employed. So
Mm.
it can happen, which is not a bad thing by any means. Having that ability to present all of your financial information, though, as a self-employed um, client to the bank is important, though. I would say it's probably more on the rarer side, but it does happen. The
Mm.
majority you'll be viewed as a PAYG, but sometimes, yep, some banks will view you as self-employed. And if you don't want to go down that path, then we can just find a lender that has a different policy. And that is the beauty of working with a broker that understands where that understands your situation because they can go to the lenders that they know are going to have a more favorable view on your employment and your income. So yes.
Yeah, excellent. Um, because I say I'm just starting to think about a home loan. I'm working as
Mm.
a pastor or a minister. What should I start to be pulling together as far as documentation or information goes before starting that application process?
Yeah. Yeah. So early days, it is always good to have a minimum of 6 months in a role before you're going to start applying. Banks just want to see consistency. And yeah, sometimes being even in church situations, you want banks just want to know that you're regularly getting paid and they can see what that looks like. So that's the first thing. Just make sure you're there for at least 6 months. And then after that, approach either a bank yourself or a broker, it doesn't really matter, but go to them preferably 3 to 6 months before you even want to apply for a loan because they will do a whole lot of credit history searches and they'll look at your expenses and they'll help you work out what can you do in the next 3 6 months to either maximize your borrowing power or just to get you in a better position with credit if there's any issues there. In terms of documentation, though, the broker or bank will be very clear on what you need. Um, but if you know that the church you're working with might not be as accurate when it comes to documentation, it's great to get all of your allowances and the percentage of your stipend and everything really clearly articulated in documents. So it depends what denomination is to where you get that information. Um, but yeah, clear documentation, have a review 3 to 6 months beforehand to make sure you're at least 6 months into a role.
Yeah, great.
Mm.
Yep. And I suppose many of us would be familiar with some of the main players in banks or institutions offering mortgages.
Yeah.
Uh, but someone like yourself who's in the industry daily, what sort of additional breadth of finding a lender does going through a broker add?
Yes. Yeah, I won't put you on the spot, but a question around like how many lenders does Australia even have? It's good to think about that. Most would probably think we've got a big four, chuck in Macquarie there is another big one, that's five, maybe a few more. But we have at least on our panel, 17 that we use regularly, and another 45 different lenders out there that are available. And all of them have slightly different policies around how they treat income from religious practitioners. So And those policies change regularly. So I don't want to even mention any particular ones now because in 6 months' time, it might change that their appetite for certain type of lending changes. So definitely, if you're in this space, a broker that knows the industry, whoever it is, I would say, essential if you want to actually maximize your chances of getting the loan that you
Mm.
want, really.
Yeah, yeah. And it saves people time as well, I guess, just in terms of all that negotiation and knowing what to pull together and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Getting that assistance. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Well, that brings our interview to a close, Ben. Thanks so much for your time today. And again, anyone listening, please feel most welcome to reach out to Benjamin at Kingdom Mortgage Broking for any additional assistance. Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.